So thanks so much. I feel like this is a little bit from going from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I want to try to bring you back down to really re-engineering the real problem of what does a patient face when they have a problem, or what do we all face in medicine when we're trying to drive change. You know, it's all this great, exciting technology hitting sort of like a blob of molasses. So, you know, I have to say that it's not that we all have our heads in the sand. It's that we have not been equipped with the tools to be able to think about quality and to be able to really be thinking about being the drivers of innovation and the drivers of what is value-driven care. I think if we were given the tools, we would be excited about trying to come up with that. So that's, I think, where we need to go. So I want to start with a couple of stories. So if someone you know, I've devoted my life to the treatment of breast cancer, but I really am thinking about how to redesign the system of care, the system of innovation, and how all this falls in. So imagine sitting in front of you is a 38-year-old who has a 10-centimeter tumor that showed up in the last month, and she wants to know what to do. Most of the places she'd be in the world, she would have surgery and hope for the best and do the best we can. That's not going to get us to that kind of brave new world where we can think about all these great things you've heard about earlier today. And so the problem for patients, you know, is that 30 to 50% of women still die of their disease depending on where in the world they live. And it takes 10 to 15 years for every new drug to get to market. And there aren't a lot of therapeutic options that are available. It doesn't matter how great you can come up with them. If you can't get them approved and you can't get them to market, you can't use them, and you don't know how to use them. And the access to these new investigational agents depend completely on an accident of birth, where in the world you live. And more diagnostics and more information doesn't mean better treatments. That's one of the things we have to think about. Now, what if you're on the other side and you're a company trying to figure out, how do I navigate this world? You know, the cost to bring a new drug to the market is somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 billion. It takes, you know, 10 to 15 years. The absence of innovation in trial design and data collection to improve the efficiency and decrease the cost of trials is palpable, but starting to change, hopefully starting to change. Cancer in particular, but cancer is not, again, breast cancer is an example, just a good example, but this is true for almost everything in medicine. Most diseases are not one disease. You know, we don't need machine learning to know that. We just need to be able to bring the data to bear on helping us understand what these new tools are. And they are not one disease, so the blockbuster approach isn't going to work, and the FDA is not going to just approve drugs for everybody. They're not going to do it. So the current path is totally unsustainable. I would commend many of you to look at this article that Andy Grove wrote in 2005, and this was, he was one of the founders and CEO of Intel, and he wrote this after his experience with prostate cancer, and I think his characterization of medicine, which hasn't really changed as much as we would hope it has, is really accurate. You've got technology just going at some unbelievable pace, and you've got clinical medicine sort of being in this really molasses state. And sort of what he kind of talked about in the semiconductor industry, they were always conducting experiments alongside, trying to generate the next generation of tools at the same time and learning. And this whole idea of a knowledge turn is that time it takes to come up with a new idea. That's the way we are in cancer. Imagine all new drugs get tested in the metastatic setting. That means when people have stage 4 disease, and for the most part, maybe some exceptions in melanoma, we can't cure metastatic disease. And we spend 6, 7 years trying to get the drugs there, and then we say, okay, now we're going to give them in an adjuvant setting, meaning we operate on people and give them systemic drugs afterwards and hope for the best. That, again, you're guaranteeing a 20-year knowledge turn. So that has got to change. So that's why we've got drug development is being so slow. And that's one of the things that, in starting the I-SPY trials, we really aim to change this, to try and think about, could we start to drive down the pace of change in phase 2, phase 3, and really change the amount of time you could get from start to finish in one trial, linked phases of trial development. So I'm going to give you an example of what that might be and why that is. But I have to tell you, you have to start with thinking about, what is the patient journey? We have to start with the patient-centered care and how to change that and how to make it more accessible for patients to participate in trials. But you have to do, like what Andy Grove said, you have to integrate the clinical trial or the clinical care and the clinical research systems. Why do we have two systems of care, and what are we practicing for anyway? We're practicing to make it better. So the systems have got to change and integrate. So around the patients, we have to be thinking about adaptive designs and learning in trials and learning using Bayesian methods for learning, and thinking about what are our clinical processes that change? What are the clinical trial processes that can change, that can drive so much? There's just years of time wasted in the way in which we organize and give credit. Some of these are just systems changes from a big picture standpoint. And then really trying to think about creating our operational infrastructure to make it easy for people to participate, changing regulatory guidance, changing the way in which the entire industry collaborates, and thinking about having the phase one, sort of how you do safety testing, and then how do you do efficacy, and then how do you do the confirmation, having it work like one seamless role. And I want to just bring in a couple of big ideas. So, lessons from CML. This is chronic myelogenous leukemia. Great story. Gleevec changes from the, this is in the accelerated phase of someone's disease in CML. These are decades after introduction of the drugs. And you can see that blue line, that's a survival probability on the left, how much better it is now for someone in the accelerated phase who gets Gleevec or gets access to one of these CR-ABL targeted medicines. But look what happens when they have advanced disease. We barely even move the needle. So I would submit to you that testing new agents in the metastatic setting, even though that's what we've always done, may not be optimal. So really, if you think about someone, this young woman, back to the young woman who walks into me, I'm a surgeon. I can take her breast off. What am I going to do for her? I am not going to save her life. She's at risk of dying of metastatic disease. If I don't get the systemic therapy right for her, nothing is going to get better, right? And I'm going to get to screening in a minute, because we're not going to screen our way into this kind of cure. So this has to be changed. So the one thing that we can take advantage of is the order of therapy doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you operate 8 weeks, 8 weeks before you give systemic therapy. No, start with the life-saving therapy first. Why? Because you can downstage the therapy. You can give people better treatment options. Most importantly, you know what the response to therapy is, and that is the biggest determinant of whether someone's going to do well or not. So use that to harness it for the way you learn, and then you go back to the FDA and you say, look, let's make this our intermediate endpoint. Let's get that into the process, to the development process, and use this as a tool to sort out the optimal treatments in the molecular era. So we have to reduce the cost, time, and numbers of patients to get these effective drugs to market. So we tried to develop this concept called the I-SPY trial, and again, we use this pathologic complete response rate, whether or not you could shrink the tumor as our endpoint. And when we started, we did not have this as a pathway to get approval at all. So the companies initially didn't really want to give us, or certainly wouldn't pay for it, but we just said, give us your drugs, let us test it, and now we have it as an accelerated process. Sometimes you just have to have the courage and go forward and do it. So the design is adaptive, and I think you're going to start to see a lot more of this, and people have to get comfortable with this idea. And so what we have is we're trying to look for the big winners. There may be 200 drugs, but how are we going to start to sort through what matters, and how are you going to start to cycle through what works, and then to start dropping out toxic therapies? So an 85% predicted likelihood of success in a 300-patient trial, that means that's a big impact. So we want to accelerate the process of identifying agents by subtype, by design, with integration of biomarkers and an analysis at the forefront. And 70% of all phase 3 trials fails. We're trying to make that making that down to 10 to 15% of trials failing. And the way this might work is a patient coming on study, based on whether their tumor is HER2 positive or not. We use MR along the way, feed the algorithm real-time data, but it means we had to collect data real-time. But then we get the ultimate answer, and that feeds the information to the next person who's going to come on trial, with the idea that over time we can drop drugs or graduate them and move them on to the next phase. So this is the example of what we call a standing trial with a master protocol. The protocol never changes. The trial never goes down. Normally, you write a new trial. For every time you want to go through, it's like 2 years, and everyone's got to get credit, and there's just all kinds of nonsense that goes on. All that should go away. And Janet Woodcock at the FDA is the biggest champion of this. And she's the one that really helped us with this design. So it's not that the FDA doesn't want to do things. Actually, the FDA is the smallest part of the problem. It's our culture culture that's the biggest part of the problem. And by the way, you can switch whatever drug comes in, one drops, another one comes on. And when we started, no companies had ever put their drugs into the same trial at the same time. And where I actually don't have them competing against each other, they're competing against the concurrent control. So we've actually been able to break the mold, change that. Now we're starting to see lots of master trials come forward. That's an advance. That's really important. Now, an important part is trying to figure out how to use these biomarkers. And when a drug leaves the trial, we learn the probability of success for our established biomarkers. But it's actually hard. It's really hard work to try and figure out how these new biomarkers are going to work. I'll show you and it turns out when you use adaptive design, you don't have equal randomization, and you're learning as you go. It's not so easy to. It's an unintended consequence of how we did this. But you have to be careful because you can't get drugs approved for biomarker data that doesn't prove what you're trying to show. So this remains an ongoing problem. But another big problem is that most people aren't even having the opportunity to participate in trials. We've actually been able to open this up at many places around the country, and there are huge numbers of people all over the country. We have 20 sites, and I want to really say that the FDA has shown a lot of leadership in trying to make this, but this is another important culture change, team science. How do you give people credit for team science? This is really important. That's been a huge opportunity. So our concept here is you take some investigational agent and drug biomarker, you achieve some surrogate endpoint that shows you've got a promising drug candidate and biomarker. You can then get that promising drug candidate and associated biomarker and get to accelerated approval and approval of your biomarker. And that's how you can get those drugs to the clinic sooner. And what we're trying to do is integrate and link these trial phases because now it turns out that, we need safety data on the standard backbone of chemotherapy, and, that can take a long time. So we've now started to bring that in-house, and the same thing for phase 3, have a network that one just seamlessly goes before the other, and that's how we're trying to work on it. So we're just starting our phase 1 set of trials, and our phase 3 set of trials. This will be in 9 countries around the world. Imagine if you had a drug where now you know that there's an effect, and you've got it waiting for 9 or 10 different countries, boom, just dropping it in, right when it's ready. Everyone, going the same direction where you're really focusing everyone's efforts on getting the right patients to the right trials. That would make a difference in getting people in. And then eventually you can start to figure out, okay, here are your standard therapies, and if it doesn't work, before they even go to the operating room, we haven't done this yet, but this is what we want to do, then you take your biomarkers and reassign and keep reassigning until someone gets the right algorithm. So I think this is also important because you want to build capacity worldwide. And this is, I think, an important social concept, that the power of the consortium can enable innovation. No one group can affect change on their own. And that's very important. And it allows companies who are participating in a meaningful way and really driving change that might otherwise look self-serving. Do you know that 90% of data collected in clinical trials no one ever looks at? The FDA never looks at. They're not even material. And it's a huge expense and effort. Why are we doing that? Submit a data plan. And if we do that as a whole, a lot can change. We want to promote international collaboration and dialogue and make sure that drugs are going to be more available across the world at the same time. And if it's faster and more efficient, we're going to get drugs at lower cost. And that's really important. I want to change for a minute to another point that I think is important about cultural change. I'm sure everyone's heard about the screening controversy. And nobody knows what to do. Should I be screened in my 40s? Should I be screened every year? Should I be screened, every 2 years? And why should my internist tell me every 2 years and the radiologist tell us, oh, I'm going to die if I don't go every year? Nothing could be further than the truth. Actually, your chance of having your life saved if you have a cancer found by a mammogram is about 5%. It's pretty small. For that, in aggregate in the US, it costs about $10 billion to screen. Think about what you could do for that money. There's plenty of resource around if we could just learn how to harness it right. So I think one of the problems is we need more light and less heat. And to remember that one size does not fit all. If all the treatments are changing now and that everyone should be getting different treatments tailored to their biology, how could it be that everyone's at risk for the same breast cancer? That just doesn't make any sense. And so why should we, this is the kind of cultural demand. Everyone's so afraid to change, and they think it's so risky to change. I would submit to you that it's much riskier not to change. If you went in and saw that computer, would you buy it? You would not. But that's actually what we're serving up to women in screening mammography. So I would say, instead of using our current risk models, you just heard about all this amazing data. Why are we putting it into action? We can look at BRCA, BRCA, SNPs for $200 now. So why are we trying to screen and figure out who should get genetic testing? No, we should find out what everybody's true risk is, or at least start with what we think is their risk and have adaptive learning as we go. Integrate all the pieces of information and then use that to assign an age to start or a frequency, and then learn and figure out how to refine risk and screening assignments. And another perfect example of how to use machine learning, turns out that 75% of all biopsies ordered today turn out to be benign. And in fact, many of the things that confuse us and make us recommend biopsies have to do with precancerous lesions that probably aren't cancer at all and probably depend on the context of risk. So context is important. That's actually where I think physicians need to be coaches and learn how to help people understand and make change. And I don't think there's any substitute for the physicians being leaders and saying, wow, I want a different world. I want to help my patients be comfortable with having that different world. And the important thing is that all of this kind of change in screening, instead of having it be $10 billion, that's billions of dollars with a B, an aggregate across the bottom on the x-axis, if we did it in a risk-based way, we would also be saving a boatload of money. And by the way, that difference of $6.5 billion is equal to the annual budget of the NCI. Think about that for a minute. So we all have to say, look, how can we make for more innovative, value-driven healthcare? That, I think, it's really important. And our value proposition is that this is going to be better care, preferred by women, enable improvement, and be enormously cost-saving in the end. But we have to prove it, so we have to have a network or a way in which we can integrate it. So I've spent years trying to develop a culture across the 5 University of California campuses to have a network that we call the Athena Network, to get people to say they're going to do this together. This is no mean feat. I would not say that all the radiologists are that happy with me, but that's the way it goes. Something I learned from my mother. I'm not running a popularity contest. I'm just trying to make meaningful change. So one of the things that we've really tried to think about in this Athena Breast Health Network, and this is, again, the way people should be trying to develop their networks and associate, is to try and say, well, look, do you have an engine for patient-reported outcomes? And by the way, we use the Salesforce platform. About 4 years ago, I thought to myself, I need to go with someone, and I have actually worked with most of the major health companies and health IT companies, and trying to figure out how can we use cloud-based systems to try and get the right information from the right person at the right time. And having automated risk assessment, we have it integrated and it's automated into the way people sign up, that we have integrated biospecimen collection, and we're starting to think about standardizing information about how you collect and report. But this is actually a great way we can start to think about using machine learning. And we have about 70,000 women already participating. And our goal actually is to have an adaptive trial, because I work with Don Barry, who's one of the leaders in Bayesian adaptive design. But one of the important things about this trial is, everyone talks about the importance of randomized trials, and they really are very important. But there's bias in randomization. The people who are willing to be randomized represent a bias. And so you have to be able to learn from everybody. So what we've tried to do is design something that everyone would want to participate in. If people feel strongly that they want to have annual screening starting at 40, fine, let them choose it. They can go to the observational cohort. Or they want the personalized screening, fine, let them go do that. Or they can be randomized, and we'll try and make the case that they'll be randomized. We've actually surveyed our patients. We think about 60% of people are going to be randomized. And you know what? Whatever will get us there, whatever information will learn us, but will get us to that answer. But I think the most important thing is that we have to have practice-generating evidence. And you can't just say, even though I personally believe that personalized screening is going to be better, but you know what? I'm willing to put it to the test. And the way to get around, the Women's Health Initiative was one of the most influential trials ever. And there was something that everyone thought that hormone replacement therapy did not have an impact on breast cancer, and in fact, it did. And when those results came out, the rates of breast cancer, the incidence of breast cancer dropped by about 20%. And in fact, that's had a lasting change. So these are the kinds of things that if we can actually start to understand who's at risk for what kind of cancer, this is not just about screening, it's about prevention. We are not going to screen ourselves into a cure. So we've got to be thinking about how to integrate these pieces. We're going to learn about the biology from my slide when we'll be able to drive this into the practice. So you've got to think about soup to nuts, screening, prevention, all the way to diagnosis, and try and figure out how we can crank the knowledge turns. And how do you associate yourselves in groups that are really committed to team learning and systems learning? So again, learn who gets what kind of cancer. One of the radiologists said to me, well, aha, you want to adapt and learn, so that means you don't know the perfect algorithm to screen. I said, that's right. She goes, well, that's not fair, then you don't really know how to do it right. I said, no, I'm testing one size fits all, 40 and over every year, to something that has the ability to learn. So let's have our day in court, and we'll see. So one of the most important things that we've done with this is that we have partners with skin in the game. So the University of California, the UC Health system, has now endorsed us, and they're paying for our set of tests that we think will help drive care. That's so important. Blue Shield has actually stepped forward, and they're redefining coverage with evidence. This, I think, is really incredible. If you want to bring new ideas forward, let everyone have skin in the game. But that means everyone's got to play a new role, right? Our technology partners like Salesforce and many of the other companies that we're partnering with. But overcoming resistance is really critical. So one of the things that we've really found is that it is so hard to find the right data in the clinical records, right? And it turns out that everybody needs the same data. So we have to figure out who's the best person to get that data, let them get it, but then we need to have clinician checklists and be able to think about how to find it. The problem with our electronic medical record systems is they're not quality systems. Who uses an electronic medical record? How many people like their electronic medical record? Okay, I rest my case. Okay, move on. So what we need is entering clinical data once and using it many times, making it simple, being able to have different roles, but that means everyone's going to have to play a different role. Patients have to be willing to share their data and come forward and know that if you get the right data in, it can seamlessly go to clinical trials and clinical efficiency and to automate registries. And so we have to, and I've talked about this whole driving innovation requiring integration of clinical care and research. Fortunately, we all need the same thing, so we need to get together and figuring out how to do that. Patients can't find trials, trials can't find patients. We actually started way back when on tools that our patients came forward to us and said, look, we want a trial matching service. A woman named Joan Schreiner came to us to try and help us build a tool we now call breastcancertrials.org. And before we had all the other pieces in place, we now anyone can go on that site and find trials, all 600 breast cancer trials that are offered at the United States, they can find it. But part of these pieces, what's another reason to have it? If you come in and if you have something wrong, let's just say you went to the operating room and you had more than 4 nodes taken out, and you knew that there was a program for you to reduce your chance of lymphedema. Why should that be up to me to decide? That should be an automated service. That doesn't need to come through me. You have to figure out what's automated, what's not. Or someone who needs a psychosocial or a smoking cessation or a counseling because of genetics. All that kind of thing should be automated and integrated in, and that actually will drive revenue in a positive way, but it will also decrease the cost of care over time. And ultimately, these are innovations that will change and allow us to have better care for patients. So we've sort of worked on a lot of these platforms, in different ways for clinician checklists, things that are not institution dependent. One of the huge problems in the healthcare industry is that all of our systems were built around what drives money, what drives billing. But in fact, and they're institutional based, but that's actually not how care is delivered. We need to start thinking about how to drive care in a much more meaningful way. And we actually hope to be able to work in collaboration with Salesforce to help drive this and make this much more diffusible and easy to use. So as I say, when you think about these things, imagine being able to provide any clinician with the right access to the right information at the right time. That is what I think will generate change. And I also have to caution against, we don't need mountains of data, but we need focus on what will drive change. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for clinicians to be thinking about what are these clinician checklists, because it's a culture change. It's not just dumping in all kinds of information and hoping that the right information will be pulled out or extracted miraculously by machine learning. It's really taking a moment to think about changing. Before I put this patient on chemotherapy, what are the 5 things I really better make sure that I know about this person? And there's a moment in time that I can learn, because if that's the stop and think moment, that also could be the time in which I get feedback on performance and feedback on new trials or new opportunities. So it's that kind of culture change that we all have to come together. And so we have to have the ability to draw in what matters, share to secure sources, and return it when and where it matters to an engaged set of clinician coaches and a receptive group of patients. So I'm going to say that I think it's all of us that have the power to catalyze change and really make medicine personalized in the way that patients hope that we are actually practicing, and that I hope that will come to allow us to take advantage of all these exciting new tools and technologies that you heard about in this conference. So thank you very much for your attention.